It is a dirty, dirty place when you're going on mission. Don't think you can just bring them to places where, like Jason pointed out, about taking his son to work with him in the military. There's going to be some words you're not, we don't say those words. And we're going to see and hear things that we don't want to see and hear, but yet we go there because it's a dark place, and you're pointing out reasons why we go and do these things. So just go to the messy places, but tell your kids when you're going to those messy places, this is why we're doing it. All right? Well, without further ado, I'm going to pass on to the new doctor. This is Dr. now, Lindsey Bonebreak, who has the most awesome last name in the world. I just got to admit that.
Yeah. It hasn't been mine for very long, so I really like it, but my husband's kind of over it.
Yeah, all right. All right, it's all yours.
All right. I'm here to talk to you about the really uncomfortable stuff. So aren't you glad that you get to end with me? That's so great. So Logan had asked me to talk about what teens need at different stages in their life, and specifically in depressed teens and anxious teens. So I'm going to kind of go through an overview of what kids need at different ages, and then I'm going to talk specifically about depression. So overall, no matter how old, as a counselor, this is what I see that kids need. They need to be heard, they need to be with, they need to be met, they need to be played with, and they need to be loved. So that's going to look different at different ages. You're not going to be on the floor playing blocks with your 15-year-old. But you can still play with them. You can still have fun with your kids. If all they see you as is a disciplinarian, they're not going to want to hang out with you. You need to be their disciplinarian. They need those boundaries. But have fun with your kids. That's part of being a family. So, starting with middle school, a primary motivator for our kid is changing from in preschool, it's safety. In elementary school, it's fun. When you get to middle school, your primary motivator is acceptance. And it's not from your parents that you're looking for that acceptance. In tweens, ages 11 to 12, those are the teenagers that think they're teenagers, but they're not teenagers yet. So their reasoning kind of starts to go backwards. These kids need help creating and implementing organization, routines, task management. If you can foster sound decision making in your kids at that age by providing them with pros and con lists, considering other viewpoints. We have lots and lots of viewpoints right now in this world about a lot of things. Provide them the opportunity to problem solve those things. Because if you do that, when they're in college, they're not going to call you as much when they don't know what to do, because you've given them the skills and the tools to problem solve on their own. So kids who know by age 10 to 11 how to make decisions exhibit less anxiety, less sadness, they get in fewer fights, and they have fewer friend problems when they get to that 12 and 13-year-old age. Because they know how to choose the right friends, they know how to make the right decisions. So these kids need you to remain supportive. Like I said, balancing that disciplinarian role and that supportive parent role. So there was a study in 2014 of 188 children. It compared the effect of mothers who were warm and affectionate and approving during disagreements, not approving the bad behavior, but approving their kid as a whole, and mothers who were angry and argumentative. The teens at 16 years old who had affectionate mothers at the age of 12 showed brain changers that were linked to lower rates of sadness, lower rates of anxiety, and greater self-control. So the way that you parent your teens changes their brain chemistry, which is scary. That's a lot of responsibility. So then we're going to transition to age 13, 14. Again, your primary motivator is acceptance if you're a teenager. If you're a parent, you just want to make it through. Okay, this is the wildly emotional time. Teens are sensitive to their peers' opinions. They react strongly to everything. That's your crying, your slammed doors, your overreaction about one question, one request, one inquiry. It's just that's that roller coaster. Your hormones are playing into it. So-and-so said that my outfit looked terrible today is playing into that, but I'm not going to tell you that because you should just know that. It's that racing thoughts. Do you know what I'm talking about? Okay. We were all teenagers at one point in time. So their responses to stress are going haywire, and the impact of the social stress is peaking. So adults who have mental disorders that are triggered by stress are usually diagnosed before the age of 15. which is heavy. So we need to model to our kids how to deal with stress. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a second. Because the brain is still maturing, the coping strategies used at this time can become ingrained in our circuitry as lifelong patterns. So, just like Logan was saying earlier, your kids are always watching you. These Foster Cline and Jim Fay say a lot more is caught than taught. You can teach your kids millions and millions of things and say do this over and over and over, but if you're not actually doing it, if they don't actually see you modeling loving Christ well to other people, showing them how to be organized, showing them what it looks like to be with people, paying attention to them, if you're doing the exact opposite of all those things you're teaching, you know what they're going to do? What you're doing, not what you're teaching. So we want to model self-soothing or coping strategies. This can be as simple as taking a break, putting your phone away for a couple of hours, going on a walk, making sure that your eating habits are balanced. That doesn't mean you have to be perfect, but moderation. Listening to music, not being at 1,000 activities all weekend and never going and then hitting right back into the week. There are times that it has to happen, but model what a Sabbath looks like to your kids. And at this point, your role in elementary school is to care well for your kids in a more of a, what's the word that I want to use? They're going to do whatever you say. Your role now is more of a coach, more of an encourager, because you're stepping back. Because you don't want them living in your basement when they're 35. So you got to start stepping back now. Coach them on friendship skills. Show them when you see different body language. Learning empathy. Empathy is the #1 skill that teachers and employers want kids to learn. Model empathy. Encourage your teens to seek friends based on shared interests, not on popularity, and dump those friends that are kind, which is going to be important in the 15, 16-year-old time. Teach your kid how to repair friendships after a fight by apologizing, making amends, or compromising. You can model this to them in your marriage. You can model this to them in the way that you deal with them. I think something that's really important for adults to do is apologize to kids when they're wrong, which sucks. It is not fun to tell a 7-year-old that you were wrong, but it's going to teach them a lot more than if I ignore it. That's probably the hardest thing that I have to tell you. So if teens or tweens have family support at this time, this becomes a stress buffer. Families who provide companionship, problem-solving, emotional support are less likely to become depressed after exposure to extreme stress because they know they can go back to their family and they have a safe place. So 15 and 16, this is where risk-taking becomes really fun. Like no other time in your life when you're 15 and 16. Oh, also these are general ages. Like there are kids who go through this quicker, there are kids who go through this slower, so this is just, don't call me and say like, my kid's 15, he's not taking any risks, because it may happen a little bit later. So the brain's reward receptors are blossoming, they're amplifying adolescent's response to dopamine. That's that neurotransmitter in your brain that's released when you are experiencing pleasure or satisfaction. And it kicks into high gear when you're 15 and 16. So this is why thrill-seeking becomes more desirable now, and your normal fears of danger are totally suppressed. Yes, I do want to speed down that street at 3 o'clock in the morning. Yes, I should stay out till 4 a.m. with these people that I don't know really well. Which is why keeping and seeking friendships based on shared interests is going to be good, because if they're surrounded by good friends, hopefully one of them is going to say like, hey, this might be a stupid idea, guys. Maybe they're near the end of their So, it's not too late for you. If you have kids who are 15 and 16 and you don't feel like you've been warm and supportive, that's okay. Teens who grew closer to their parents starting at age 15 took fewer chances 18 months later. There's always time. There's always an opportunity to rebuild, restructure, and craft a really healthy relationship with your teen. Closeness to a parent looks like having a parent that respects you and helps you through your problems, is not constantly arguing or yelling at you. There's going to be times for that. Let's be honest, like you're going to get in a fight with your kid. I got in fights with my parents. I still get in fights with my parents sometimes. It's part of life. I am confident that my children will get in fights with me. So, your brain's changing. Development is evident at this change. Your prefrontal cortex, where your judgment and decision making is generally developed enough at this point. So you're slowing. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't say. This is 17 and 18. So your prefrontal cortex is slowing down. Your judgment and decision making is there. It's developed enough to serve as a brake on the runway of emotions and risk taking. Brakes can start getting pumped at this point in time. Problem solving and planning strategies, these are going to continue to develop till you're 20, which is why you are going to get those calls in college like, Mom, I don't know how to do my laundry. Please walk me through this. Or how do I cook this food in the microwave? How do I, just simple things. Still takes a little bit longer till we're about 20 when that executive functioning. Hopefully if you start at 11 and 12, you'll be fine, but still have those issues. Teens are better at noticing how other people feel and showing empathy by the time they're 17 and 18. So they're a little bit less selfish at this point in time. And they still are going to have trouble deciphering people's motives and attitudes in really complex situations. But this is another opportunity for you to like step back and allow them to problem solve while providing advice. So here's the super uncomfortable part where I might get on a little bit of a soapbox. So I'm going to talk specifically about depressed teens that are just struggling with depression and anxiety. So because your job as a parent of a teen is to begin to step back into a supportive role and prepare them for adulthood, you have to accept the fact that your teen has to want help with these things. You can't do it for them. I, as a counselor and a therapist, cannot do this for them. They're going to have to want help. All I can do is provide support and provide tools and provide empathy. But until they want to change, we can't make them change, which is hard. So depression symptoms in teens look a little bit different than in adults. So I'm going to give you the symptoms. The first one is sad or irritable. Teens tend to fall more on the irritable side. Most of the day, most days in a week for at least 2 weeks. There's a loss of interest in things that they used to enjoy. Eating and sleeping habits are changed, whether that is you're sleeping too much or you're sleeping too little, or you're eating too much or you're eating too little. They're going to be struggling with feelings of worthlessness, hopelessness about the future, or guilt about things that aren't their fault and they have no control over. Their grades may drop, there may be difficulty concentrating, and there may be thoughts of suicide. Do not be afraid to talk to your teens about suicide. Suicide is real. They all know about it. I've talked to 6-year-olds about suicide. Between 4,000 and 6,000 teenagers in the United States commit suicide each year. They are aware of it. And if you pretend like it's not there, they're not going to know that they can talk to you about it when they may have those self-harming thoughts or those contemplations. I know that's hard, and I know that's heavy, and I know it's uncomfortable to start a conversation like that, but it's going to be a lot more comfortable to have a conversation like that than it is going to be go to a teenager's funeral. Because I've been to that funeral, and it is not fun. Suicide is the third leading cause of death in 12 to 18-year-olds. And this is what you can do. Be supportive. Respond empathically. Do not respond by saying, oh no, you shouldn't feel that way. I understand how you feel, or I don't understand how you feel. Can you explain that to me? Can you tell me why? Offer genuine support. Listen without lecturing and judging. Validate their feelings. If you have a teen struggling with depression, accentuate positive things that are happening. If they remember to do their chores, affirm them in that. If they get a good grade, affirm them in that. Be an affirmation guru. Notice the things that they are doing, because those things may be really difficult for them to get up in the morning and do. Getting through the whole day of school without crying could be the hardest thing they do that day. Help your kid get treatment. Be gentle and persistent in this, because there are going to be some kids, just like there are some adults, that don't think they need help, constantly keep that door open for them. If they're not ready for it, listen to them, because that's them telling you that they need space. But constantly remind them gently that you're still here for them. You're happy to help them find options. Give them ownership of finding who their therapist is. To ask them what they want in a therapist. Ask them their opinion after an intake interview. The more ownership they feel of it, the less coerced they're going to feel into doing it. Which may make them a lot more open to receiving treatment and having someone else to talk to. Again, treatment won't work unless your teen wants to change. And sometimes that just takes going to a couple appointments and trusting that the crazy lady with yellow pants is actually going to listen to me and not tell my parents every single detail, and maybe she knows what she's talking about sometimes. Or at least she's listening to me, and she's far enough away from St. Joe that I can speak freely. And if a therapist isn't working for them in particular, and they dread it and they hate it still, ask them what's not working, and ask them how you can help them find someone else. And then the last thing that I think is really important is that you need to take care of yourself. Just like when you have infants, they say happy mommy, happy baby. When you have teenagers, happy parents, happy kid. So make sure that while you are caring well for your kids and while you're dealing with difficult things, I don't want to be a teenager right now. I'm glad that I was a teenager 15 years ago. They are constantly bombarded with comparison. They are constantly bombarded with challenges to everything they believe and all that they do. And I am grateful that I made it out right before then. But love them well. Pray a lot. And know that everything that they choose to do or the things that they're struggling with is not always a parenting problem. It's not always because you're doing something wrong. It's because of who they are and what they need to deal with in their growing up. And some of it isn't fun. But I would bet that we all have things growing up that weren't fun, but we know helped shape us into who we are. So a couple of resources that I have. There is Parenting with Love and Logic and Parenting Teens with Love and Logic. If you want a lot of really practical steps, really engaging biblical principles, these are great. And then so I didn't talk a lot about anxiety specifically. There was an article in the New York Times a few weeks ago called "What If the Tooth Fairy Kills Me in My Sleep?" And it's a really cool article about how a parent dealt with their anxiety through seeing anxiety in their kid. I recommend it. It's really good. And then there's another series of books that just came out by Joyner and Ivy called "It's Just a Phase, So Don't Miss It, Why Every Stage Matters." And so there's one big book that gives an overview of all the stages of childhood, and then there's a specific book for each. So there's like a newborn to one. So I haven't read them all specifically, and they're coming out like progressively because the authors are trying to catch up with what they need to write. But it's been a really helpful resource for me in my practice at Peace Partnership. And I know that I'm supposed to ask if you guys have any questions, and I know that was really quick and intense, but yeah.
Some questions we're going to hand out real quick. This is Peace Partnership. This is where Lindsey works, Dr. Bonebreak works at. And these are the business cards, so Lindsey.
What's the name of your books again?
So these books are called Parenting with Love and Logic and then Parenting Teens with Love and Logic. And the other book is called It's Just a Phase, So Don't Miss It.
I got that.
There are also lots of other really great parenting books. I just haven't read them all. So, thank you.